So every time I felt myself getting upset or feeling that anger about what happened, I would pull out my computer or my phone and start typing. And I'm like, okay, let's redirect that energy into something more productive.
This is the Brandon Smith Show, and the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing, that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So our show today, our topic today, I think is a very powerful one. A powerful one for us individually, but a powerful one for us as leaders and with our teams. We're going to talk about the power of forgiveness. So not only how do we leverage forgiveness for us as individuals, but how do we think about creating environments that are forgiving, psychologically safe environments where people feel like it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to put themselves out there, and they're not going to be punished. So we're going to be looking at it from both angles today, and to kind of guide us on this journey, I'm so thrilled to have an amazing guest, Christie Lindor. Christie, how are you?
I'm good, Brandon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well. So I'm really excited, and because I know this is an area that you have the unique ability to look at it from both angles, both individually, but also to kind of guide systems, organizations, leaders on how they can do this better. So I'm excited to kind of see where our conversation takes us. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more about you and who you are. My listeners love story time, but I want to make sure I get your titles right, because you wear a lot of important hats. So you wear the consultant hat, author hat, speaker hat, and you're a workplace expert.
Yep. And then you can also tack on wife, mom, introvert, any, I feel like I can keep going with the title.
I gotcha. And I got the introvert hat too. So totally get it. Well, tell us a little bit about, let's do story time. Tell me how you got into this space and how kind of you ended up coming to this kind of idea of forgiveness as being a powerful thing.
Sure. So, what's interesting, if you had asked me 2 years ago, if I was going to write a book on forgiveness, or if you told me 2 years ago I was going to write a book on forgiveness, I actually would have laughed at you, because that wasn't something that was kind of on the surface for me. But I guess in terms of, to kind of put a little context to it, I actually realized maybe 2-3 years ago before that I had been using forgiveness as a skill set. And it just really was just me being a woman of color in a male dominated field. So I've spent, my entire career as a management consultant, and just kind of my mere existence, especially earlier in my career. I actually went through kind of a lot of different uphill battles, because I was usually the only, right? I was the only woman and person of color in the spaces and the environments that I worked in. And so I dealt with a lot of kind of subtle and sometimes not so subtle, kind of everything you can think of, I've dealt with it, whether we're talking about sexism, we're talking about racism, we're talking about microaggressions, a lot of unconscious bias. I kind of dealt with that. And forgiveness actually just became part of a muscle that I built, to be able to focus on my work, to really, focus on becoming a great consultant. And I didn't realize how much I had been using it, because I got to a point that I was so good at it, right? When you find out, if you're, in the middle of a meeting, and then you may find out that, like maybe a couple minutes before the meeting, that one of your colleagues you've been working with has maybe, less work experience than you, but is making 45% more money than you. How would you feel, if that was what you were kind of working? And then you gotta kind of take something like that out of your head and push forward and meet with a CEO, or, sitting in meetings. Sometimes I sit in meetings, I'm the only woman in the room, and my ideas aren't really acknowledged until they're repeated by one of my male colleagues in a different way. And then it's like, oh, that's a great idea. So, that was my experience day in and day out. And I had to lean on forgiveness as a survival technique. So when it came to the surface a couple years ago, I was at a point where I was really I was really kind of on a roll. After you spent 15 plus years as a consultant, you kind of know what you're doing, right? So I felt pretty confident. I felt like, all kind of some of the earlier challenges in my career were over. I knew I kind of created a formula of success. So for me, it was, if I was the most knowledgeable person in the room, I was the most prepared, I was the hardest person working in the room, then I was always win. That was the belief I created. And for some time it worked. And then one time it didn't work. I was up for a promotion, actually one of the top promotions. It was a senior management level role. And in my mind, I thought I had it in the bag, right? Because I was like, I know I worked my tail off. I know I kind of checked all the boxes. And to the shock of myself, and actually to even my colleagues, I actually did not get that promotion.
Wow.
And it was the first time in my life that I felt like, a formula I had created for success didn't work. And I felt like my world was going to come crashing down. Now, outside looking in, most people would say, Christie, is not that serious. It's just a promotion. But I know how hard I worked. I know how prepared. I knew I did everything that I thought I was supposed to, but that was not good enough at that particular moment. So that night, I remember, I kind of had to go back to, what made me successful? And I thought about the fact that I had been using forgiveness casually throughout all of my career. And that's when I decided, I said, you know what, I need to formalize this technique. I need to soup up this forgiveness model I had been using. I need to soup it up to a whole other level, because what got me, what helped me become successful over the years, that helped me get into, up to, going from a contributor role into management, is not the same skills I'm going to need to become an executive or a senior executive. So that was the first realization that I got to change something up. And that's when I formalized my technique. So in doing so, something amazing happened. I actually became really intentional. There's kind of a systematic 3-step technique that I came up with. It's a reflect, reach out, release framework that I came up with. And I started using that. And the energy I had of the disappointment of of not getting that promotion, I fueled into putting my framework into work. And I mean, honestly, Brandon, I think in 15 months, literally my entire career changed. I went from not only getting that promotion, like 6-7 months later, but I also ended up writing my first book. I landed my first TED Talk. I really started to really become more of a thought leader, which was a little bigger than the role that I had, I was kind of going up for promotion in the first place. So I thought that, I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. So I decided to share the technique with some friends and say, because they're like, Christie, what did you do? Something happened in your life and now you're like on fire. So what is it that you did? And I explained to them, and I kind of gave them the technique, and they applied it at work and they started to see changes. And then, in talking through them, it's like, I need to formalize this. And that actually was kind of the birth of this, this guided journal that I wrote.
Wow. Beautiful. Fantastic. So I'm really curious.
It's a long story, by the way.
It's a great story. And it would be wrong for us to overlook the fact that you made a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to go down the path of forgiveness when you could have gone down the path of resentment or whatever else that so many of us do. We get mad, and we get angry. And you made the choice to forgive, which is, we would all sit here and say it's healthier. We'd also all sit here and say it's harder. It's a lot harder. So I don't know if there was something that you can point to that really inspired that choice for you, or if it was just who you are.
Well, as I mentioned, forgiveness has always been a part of my values and framework. And it had to be to kind of, for me to be able to really survive in the work environment. I work in a very high stakes, very demanding, aggressive type of career. So I had to come up with different tools and techniques internally in order to manage that. And so forgiveness was always an undercurrent. I think what was interesting about not getting this promotion that I worked hard for is that really kind of cue into that, because I don't think I realized that up until that point.
Yeah.
And it helped me level up what I had created into something more systematic, into something that is more tangible, and I've now mastered, right? So now I'm in a space where, I'm still employed. I work for a great organization now, but I've actually created my own lane, and I make my own promises. I no longer take a scarcity approach or scarcity model to my career. Because I think up until this point, it was all about, well, okay, if I get this promotion or I get the special projects, I'm that's definition of success. And now it's more about, well, what is it that I want to do? What's my purpose, and how I'm going to do that regardless of what the external factors are. And that, for me, that type of power I kind of took back.
Yeah.
Was really empowering. And that's what forgiveness brought to my life.
That's so interesting too, because I think when I think of forgiveness, I think of it as a passive position. Not to say that it's bad, but it's a passive, peaceful position. And what you're bringing to this conversation is, while it might be, there's also a lot of power in it, which I think is such an important thing. And then you talk about how it then has, it can be systematic, and it can allow you to level up and really help you kind of achieve more things, more impact.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Brandon, because I think it's important not to mistake forgiveness for weakness, which I think a lot of people, when we think about forgiveness in the workplace, those two kind of words together are usually not on the same, they usually don't coexist in the same space, right? I think people think of forgiveness when they leave work, when they think about their friends and family, or even in a spiritual, religious realm. And I'm actually flipping the definition of forgiveness on its head. And I'm saying, in my book, I kind of outlined 10 tenets of forgiveness, a couple of which, forgiveness does not mean everything's okay, right? Forgiveness doesn't, it doesn't mean that it has to be an absolute or a zero-sum game, that someone has to be like completely right or someone has to be completely wrong. In my view, I use forgiveness as a form of accountability for myself and a form of self-care, in which I look at it as, regardless of the 90% that's happened to me in my life, let me maximize the hell out of that 10% that I have control over. And in doing so, I'm able to, like you said earlier, I'm able to really focus on what matters. So in the decision, when I didn't get that promotion that I had been gunning for, I focused my 10% on, I didn't get it, but here's all these other things that I can put that energy and that anger, and I can kind of reframe it and put all that energy in that. And that's actually what ended up kind of creating this entirely new possibility that I didn't even have before.
Yeah, beautiful. So Isaac's motioning to me that we need to start to roll into break. When we come out of break, you said something earlier that I want us to pick up on right after break. I want to talk about your 3 R's. So that reflect, reach out, release. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because it sounds like that's almost the special ingredients or the process that we can take to get there. Awesome. Okay, so stay tuned. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back. Here's your coaching minute for the week, presented to you by the Leadership Foundry. So credibility, as we know, is super, super important. Let's say now you've gotten into a new job. You've either got a new boss or a new team, and you're trying to build credibility really, really quickly right out of the gate. One of the easiest ways to do that is focus on proactive communication. We all do the reactive communication stuff. People text us, IM us, email us, and we respond. Focus on proactive communication, particularly status updates. It's so simple and easy, but it's a great way to provide quick clarity into what you're working on and build credibility. And I find it to be the best way to enhance trust quickly with a new boss. So put on your calendar either every Friday or every Monday, typically the end or beginning of a week, to send to your boss what are maybe those 3 to 5 things you got accomplished during the week, and what are the 3 to 5 things that you're going to work on the next week. And you'll find after about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of doing that with your new boss, that they'll say, hey, those were really great. You don't need to send those anymore. I really appreciate what you've been up to. So give it a try. It's a quick way to build credibility and enhance trust right out of the gate. Welcome back from break. This, of course, is Brandon Smith, and this is the Brandon Smith Show. And we have been talking about forgiveness. And the word I'd want to emphasize in this is the power of forgiveness. So, Christie, we were really talking about how it's not a passive position. It's not a position of weakness. It's a position of power. It can really help you, in your case, really create new lanes, as you said, really change trajectory. So you had mentioned in a very subtle comment that you have your own kind of process or methodology for that. And you talked about reflect, reach out, and release. And I immediately wrote that down and put a big box around it and starred it a couple times because I was like, no, we can't just let that go. Like I need to hear more about that. So talk to us a little bit more about that. Talk to me about that. What do each of those things mean to you, and how do we do those?
Sure. So in my book release, this is part of, I call it the 3 R's of forgiveness. And that's the framework that I came up with. And it's really, really simple, right? So reflect is number 1. And you can use this technique in any way possible. I've gotten to a point that I've internally, memorized it, and it's become a competence, like an unconscious competence for me. But reflect, the first thing I do is, if something happens, let's go back to the example about not getting that promotion, right? So I would reflect on, what is the decision or outcome, that I want, right? Based on the cards that's been dealt with to me. So I focus on the reality and say, what is it that I want now, right? So in the case of that promotion, I said, instead of focusing, that's something that's out of my control, in terms of not getting that promotion. What I can do is really kind of start to focus and really creating more of a thought leadership, more of a brand outside of my firm, and being able to kind of create almost an insurance policy for my career. Because I felt like I realized in reflecting on my career at that time, I had spent so much energy and thought and thinking and time and resources internally focused, internally making sure that people knew who I was getting on the right projects, I was building the right relationships with the right leaders, but no one outside of my company knew who I was at the time. So I said, you know what? Let me maybe spend some time and start building my brand outside of my firm. And that was the decision I made after thinking through various different outcomes and alternative decisions. So for me, that was the reflect part. Number 2 is reach out. So reach out, you can either conduct a real or a symbolic outreach to really acknowledge the person or the situation and help disassociate the emotion. Because when you think about, when we think about when we're angry or sad or disappointed, there's a lot of raw emotion and energy that's associated to that. Yeah. So I kind of break it down and figure out, what type of outreach do I want, right? Is it that I want to go back to the individual? In this case, it may have been my manager, to have a conversation and figure out, what was some of the feedback that I got that maybe I can do better in the future? Is it that if for whatever reason I feel like, I don't want to talk to my manager, which is also an option. I could have maybe written a letter, right? And if I wanted to, mail the letter or not mail the letter, but I wrote the letter and to get that out, kind of empty my cup, so to speak. But I decide to do some sort of outreach, whether it's a real or symbolic, to really acknowledge the situation head on. I think that's important in order to make space, right? And in doing so, in making the space is the 3rd step, which I call release. And that's when, again, I make a conscious, intentional decision on how I redirect that energy, whether it means developing new habits, helping maybe achieve some of the goals, back to the decisions and the outcomes that I made. So in this area, in the release part, I actually talk about 2 types of releases. You can have debilitating releases, like holding grudges or feeling envious or abusing drugs or alcohol, right? That's a release, right? Yeah. Or you can have what I call invigorating releases. And in the case with my promotion, I said I had already was at the time thinking of writing a book. So every time I felt myself getting upset or feeling that anger about what happened, I would pull out my computer or my phone and start typing. And I'm like, okay, let's redirect that energy into something more productive. And honestly, it was really kind of in going through that motion. And sometimes I have to go through it a couple of times, depending on the situation. Other times I go through the framework once. But I think the key is that it helps create intentionality around your actions.
It's beautiful. I took some notes while you were talking. So I want to come back to you. I want to play back what I heard and some thoughts I had in my head and see if
Sure.
I'm getting this right. Okay. So the reflect part, when you're really kind of thinking about what happened, what I really took away from what you were talking about was there was a sense of kind of almost agency and ownership from you. Like you were thinking about, well, what can I do in this, or how do I want to react to this? It was really a sense of, it was coming from a place of powerful position. Like what can I do here? Not what's been done to me.
Right.
And then after you've kind of gotten through that portion and you get ready to reach out, which I think is a powerful part of the step, it requires a sense of kind of, you have to be open to what the person's going to say, but also kind of acknowledge what you were feeling, thinking in a very kind of honest, open way, which I think is really powerful. And then it goes to release, which is, okay, so what am I going to do? What am I going to do with this? And I've got a choice. I can be kind of productive in that or not so productive in my release. And in your case, it was, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to create my own path or create that insurance policy for me. So that was some thoughts I had going through my head. Did I get this right?
Yeah, you covered it right. And one thing I'll add, if for your listeners, the example I gave was like a just in time, situation that may have happened. What I found in talking to different people about the book, I actually interviewed different people and shared some case studies in the book. There's actually a lot of folks that may have actually had resentments or had some unresolved situation that happened to them a long time ago, right? And they've been walking around with this residual, right? And what happens is that they're making all their decisions based on that past experience. So they're still living in the past, but they're making today's career decisions using that energy. So I think that's important to notate when you think about the reflect, the reach out, the release framework. With the reach out part of it, I've actually had some friends, like I mentioned, they may have written an email, like a long email, and kind of get it all out there. And then they decide to not send the email out, or they've written a letter. And some people have decided to make the outreach and connect with other folks. Some people didn't. I actually had one of my friends. She had some issues with one of her colleagues. And she decided she was actually just going to a bonfire, and she wrote a letter, like a 4-page letter to her colleague, and she put it in the bonfire. And that was her way to kind of, do that reach out. So it was more symbolic for her. So if you found yourself in a situation that you may have, dealt with something in the past, it can, like I said, the reach out part can be real and happening in real time, or it can be symbolic. It's really about your self-care and what you need in order to really kind of empty your cup, as I like to say.
Yeah, totally. I think where it becomes tricky, you may not have an answer for this, but it may become tricky when they're not aware they're doing it, right? So this event's happened to me in the past, and now I've decided, like, that's now my lenses. From now on, every time someone does something to me, it's just like that time again. And they're almost looking for those things to happen.
Right. Right. And that becomes scary. And I know that I think for me, and maybe that's how I ended up creating forgiveness as like a survival technique, because I felt like maybe for some time, things that would happen, I would just kind of internalize it and internalize it and internalize it. And I realized that internalizing it is not serving me. And I had to figure out a way, and then it was just some internal work I did to say, you know what, I gotta let this shit go. Like I can't just keep holding on and pretending everything is okay, and it's not okay. Yeah. And I think acknowledging that and to say, you know what are some things, and so that's actually why I like that you brought that up, Brandon. That's actually why I created the book as a guided journal. So I thought that the topic of forgiveness is so heavy, but it has to be a participatory event.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just read about it and then like, oh, okay, that was nice, and put the book away. I created it where there's space, you can write, you can reflect in the book. You know, it gives you, because I think in part of the introspection helps bring some of those things to life. So like I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, I didn't realize how much time I had been investing internally in my firm. And as a senior executive, you need to have market presence. So it was because of that reflection period that I said, wait a minute, there's a gap. I need to really kind of be out in the marketplace, and I need to kind of get my name out there. And that's when I decided to kind of focus my release on doing that. If I had not done that, I would probably still be stuck, right? So I think it's all about, you know, kind of creating the space and the time for new possibilities that you probably would have never thought of.
Yeah, totally. So Isaac cued me that we're getting close to the end here. So I have one last question for you, Christy,
Sure.
before we get into the life hack question. So as a manager and as a leader of people, how do you try and create an environment that nurtures forgiveness?
Yeah.
Has it changed how you lead people in any way?
So when I think about forgiveness as it relates to management and leadership, I think, and I like how you said psychological safety, because I think it's all about being empathetic and creating a space where people can be authentic and they can bring their true selves to work. And I think if you are a manager, you know, helping people and creating the space where people can be innovative, they can be creative, and they don't have, if even if they're being creative, they're allowed to fail. And I think sometimes, you know, when I've spoken to different leaders about the concept of forgiveness, they put it in the same space as, oh, does that mean that you know, I'm going to allow mediocrity to breed? And that's not the case at all. We're not talking about mediocre performance or saying, okay, that's an excuse to lower standards. What we are saying is that in order for any company to thrive in the future, you have to innovate. And in order to innovate, you have to create kind of space and time for people to be able to take on maybe different projects, different things that's outside of the day to day. So, for example, I think Google does this really well, where they give people Fridays off. They give people, I think it's on Fridays or a Friday a month, where that person can work on whatever project that they want to work on. And that's actually in that one day that, you know, people have, they're able to come up with different products and ideas. And a lot of some of Google's prime products have come as a result of that 20% project time. And so that's just one example of how do you create that sense of safety, that forgiveness, where people can try different things, and if it works, okay, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
Yeah. And so recognizing that you're going to have failures if we want to innovate, because that's how we learn. And then we have to be able to accept those. And that's where that forgiveness comes in. And I can see the connection between like Brene Brown's work and vulnerability, how this is a nice extension to that, which is, you know, an accepting of those things. Beautiful.
Exactly.
Christy, this has been amazing. So I ask all my guests this question. What's one life hack you have for us to help us live a life more free from dysfunction, either personally or professionally?
How much time we got? So I mean, I guess one that I've been doing recently that's at least has been successful. I got rid of the daily to-do list.
Oh, interesting.
I got rid of the daily to-do list. Instead, you know, once a week. So let's say if it's on a Sunday, maybe it's a Saturday, but I use the First Things First framework by Covey.
Yep.
And it really talks about kind of putting things in quadrants. So I focus on, you know, all the activities in the quadrant that's about planning, ideating, and really kind of I focus all my energy there. But my daily to-do list is now a week, or sometimes this is a month, and I manage it based on energy, not time. And in doing those two things, I feel like I not only get more done, I get deeper work done. And there is more, it's like of more quality, which has been very fascinating. So for me, that's been really important, again, at my level, you know, being kind of going from that manager to more senior manager, director level. It's been a lot more effective because it gives me the, you know, time and space to be more introspective and to be able to build connections and relationships.
It sounds like a whole other show.
So yeah, that's
awesome.
my hack for today.
I love it. It's a great hack. So if people want to either learn more about you, follow you, buy a copy of the book, where can they go?
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me on your show. People can check me out on my website, ChristieLindor.com. Under that, you can find I have my podcast, my books out there.
And it's Chris. And for the folks listening, it's Christie, ChristieLindor.com.
Correct.
Okay.
Or you could connect with me on LinkedIn, Christie Lindor as well.
Fantastic. Awesome, Christie. Thank you. This was amazing. And thank you for listening and watching. Of course, check out a new show every Sundays. We drop it on Facebook Live. And if you're not listening or subscribing on iTunes, what are you waiting on? You should subscribe on iTunes. And please rate and review the show. That's how more people find out about us and learn about all the great stuff we're up to. Grows our tribe, so more and more of us can be fighting dysfunction. And so until our next show, have a great week and an awesome life.